All right, welcome back to another edition of Ed Puzzle Lecture Notes for Human Biology. I think this is number 4, but I may be mistaken. All right, today we're going over what's called the diencephalon. Remember, diencephalon includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. So right here on the model of the human brain, right here, here's the thalamus right here. Remember, always look for this little bump, the interthalamic adhesion. Just inferior and slightly anterior would be the hypothalamus right here. This, of course, would be the pituitary gland. And then just posterior, you're going to have the epithalamus back in here, which is going to include the pineal gland. Remember, that secretes melatonin, which helps you go to sleep. And it also includes what's called the choroid plexus. Remember, the choroid plexus is what creates and circulates cerebrospinal fluid. Remember, it's the ventricles. You can see right here on the sheep brain. Here's the ventricle, lateral ventricle. That's what holds cerebrospinal fluid. So in the sheep brain over here, we're gonna have to, in the lab practical, you're gonna need to know, where these different structures in the brain are in the sheep brain. So here's your thalamus right here. Just below that, you're gonna have the hypothalamus. Pituitary gland would be right here. This is the optic chiasm. Pineal gland is right there. So let me go ahead and circle it. So the epithalamus is gonna be right in here. There's your pineal gland. And right in this area right here, that's where the choroid plexus is gonna be. And a different view of the diencephalon. The last one was a mid-sagittal section. This is going to be a coronal slash frontal. So it's kind of like you're looking this way from the front. And once again, you can see here the thalamus right here. So there's a thalamus on the left side of your brain, also on the right side. They're connected by the interthalamic adhesion. And then just inferior to that, you got the hypothalamus right here. Optic chiasm or optic tract. Optic chiasm was where the optic nerve crosses. So some of your visual stimulation from your left eye will actually cross to the other side and go to your right occipital lobe. And up here, you got the tract called the corpus callosum. Remember, that's called a commissure tract because it connects different sides of the cerebral hemispheres. And right here, you got the longitudinal fissure. Remember, that goes right down the middle of the cerebrum, separating the left and right cerebral hemispheres. Here you have the lateral ventricles. Remember, that's what holds cerebrospinal fluid. The two blue structures here, this is part of the basal nuclei or basal ganglia, as well as this green. But for the lab practical, you're just going to be able to have to find where in a sheep brain the thalamus and the hypothalamus is. And the easiest way to do it, find the lateral ventricles, because they'll be really easy to see. Just go below that. You'll see a little slightly gray. That's going to be the thalamus. And just go below that and you'll find the hypothalamus. All right, so that's the diencephalon in a frontal slash coronal view. All right, so the thalamus, 1 inch long. I highly doubt there's going to be a question like, hey, how long is the thalamus? A half inch. B, 1 inch. There's not going to be a question like that. Just know where it's at. So here it is again in green. There's the thalamus, hypothalamus just below it, epithalamus back here. What's its function? Its main function, you're going to know, it's a relay station for sensory impulses or sensory information that's coming up from the body. First, it goes to the thalamus, and then it's going to relay it to the primary somatosensory cortex, or it's going to relay it wherever in the brain it needs to go. So it's a relay center for sensory information. It also has crude perceptions of pain, temperature, and pressure. It does play a role in consciousness, which makes you kind of like stay alert, and a role in cognition, which is like the process of thinking and storing new memories. So it does play a role in that. But the main thing right here, relay station for sensory information. So all sensory information passes through the thalamus, and then it's going to send it where it needs to go in the cerebrum. And now the next part of the diencephalon, the hypothalamus right here. It's a little small little part of the brain, but man, is it important. It's got a lot of jobs. Located just below or inferior to the thalamus. Here's the thalamus right there. Connected to the pituitary gland superiorly above by what's called the infundibulum. So it's kind of hard to see. It's kind of small, but the pituitary gland's right here, this little bump right there. And you can see it's being held, a little stalk or a little branch that's kind of holding the pituitary gland. That's called the infundibulum. You haven't needed to know that in previous exams, so I doubt you'll need to know it. Contains 4 major regions and 12 nuclei. Once again, previous exams, you didn't need to know that. You can write it down if you want, but if it's not on your quizzes that I give you, it won't be on the test. All right, the functions. It's got 6 basic functions. Number 1, regulates activity of the autonomic nervous system, so smooth muscle, glands for heartbeat, food movement through your gastrointestinal tract, digestion in your urinary bladder. It also controls the pituitary gland, the master gland. So that's what connects the endocrine, that's your hormones, and the nervous system, brain and spinal cord. So remember, so the pituitary gland, it's the master gland because it controls a lot of your other glands, like your thyroid gland, your adrenal gland, the sex glands in both males and females. Emotional and behavioral, as far as the limbic system, so rage, aggression, pain, pleasure, sexual arousal, also part of the functions of the hypothalamus. And some more functions of the hypothalamus of the diencephalon. 4, we already did that one. That was so it's really only 6 different functions because 4, that's a repeat. 5, thirst, satiety centers. So that's like satiety is like, hey, I'm full. I just ate some food. I don't need to eat any more food. So it tells body if you're hungry, if you're thirsty, if you're full. Body temperature regulation. So it's what uh, through different neurotransmitters, it helps keep the body around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that temperature has actually gone down through evolution. We've evolved. I think our body temperature is actually lower than 98.6 now. And also helps to regulate circadian rhythms. So that's like where it late, when it gets dark and it starts getting later, you start to feel tired. And then, when the sun comes up and it's time to get up, your body starts to get activated. You start to wake up. And it works with something called the reticular activating system, or the RAS. Now, the RAS, reticular activation or activating system, is located in the brainstem, the pons and the medulla mainly. And that's what, when that's damaged, you go to sleep, you're unable to wake up. So you're kind of like in a coma. So it's the reticular activating system that arouses you from sleep. And I was almost going to take out this slide because you're not going to need to know it. But so here's all the different nuclei in the hypothalamus right here. You don't need to write these down because you do not need to know them ever. But you do need to know that a nucleus or nuclei, those are clusters of neuron cell bodies, gray matter, located within the central nervous system. And just here you can see the infundibulum that's holding the pituitary gland. Here's your pituitary gland right here. Of course, thalamus right up here. Right here, it's called the intermediate massive thalamus. I've always learned it the interthalamic adhesion. And you got your midbrain, the pons, and then the medulla oblongata right here. All right, so all you need to know, so from the previous slides, where is the hypothalamus and what are its 6 functions? And now the pituitary gland, that's a pea-sized gland or organ in the brain that sits in a bony structure called the sella turcica. You will not need to know that for this unit, but next semester in the skeletal system, you'll need to know that the sella turcica is this little bony structure that allows the pituitary gland to sit into it. And it's connected to the hypothalamus. That's controlled by the hypothalamus. And you can see right here, you're not going to need to know all this stuff. There's an anterior and a posterior pituitary. You're not going to need to know these hormones, but just in case you're curious about some of them, growth hormone, anterior anterior pituitary for growing bones and muscles. You got what's called luteinizing hormone for the ovaries, follicle stimulating hormone for the ovaries and the testes, adrenocorticotropic hormone for the adrenal glands, thyroid stimulating hormone for the thyroid gland, vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone for the kidneys that controls how much water is in your body. All right, so basically the pituitary gland, you're not going to need to know these hormones. Through all of its hormones, controls a lot of the hormones from a lot of other glands in your body. So that's why they call it sometimes the master gland, because its hormones influence the activity of other glands in the body. All right, so it controls functions of many other endocrine glands. So things like sexual growth and development, your metabolism through the thyroid gland, response to stress, that'll be through the adrenal gland. All right, so that's the pituitary gland. And remember, it is controlled by the hypothalamus. And the final part of the diencephalon. So remember, we went over the thalamus, a relay station for sensory information. We had the hypothalamus, had 6 different functions, including controlling the pituitary gland. Now we have the epithalamus. It forms the roof of what's called the third ventricle. You're not going to know the difference between the various different ventricles. Just know the ventricles are spaces within the brain that hold cerebrospinal fluid. So the third ventricle is right here. Now, there's a structure called the choroid plexus, and that's right here in purple. And the capillaries and the ventricles, they contain ependymal cells. And it's those ependymal cells in the choroid plexus that produce and circulate CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid. And remember, the cerebrospinal fluid helps to protect the brain because the brain is basically floating inside of cerebrospinal fluid. It also provides the nutrients that the brain needs, the glucose, sugar, the oxygen. It's also how the brain gets rid of waste like carbon dioxide. All right, so and then also part of the epithalamus is the pineal gland. Pineal gland right here, just located posterior to the thalamus. Tiny little endocrine gland in the middle of the brain. And remember, it's what secretes what's called melatonin. So when it gets dark, your pineal gland will start secreting more melatonin. That's going to cause you to start getting sleepy, and eventually you go to sleep. All right, so that's the last part of the diencephalon, the epithalamus. And now we're going to move on into the brain stem. The brain stem is made up of 3 structures, from superior to inferior, or from top to bottom. It's made up of the midbrain, the pons, and the most inferior, or the most on the bottom, is the medulla oblongata. All right, so here once again is the sheep brain. Well, here's the human brain, so you can see midbrain right there, pons, and then medulla on the bottom. In the sheep, here's a review of some important structures. Right here is the corpus callosum. Remember, that's the commissure that connects the right and left cerebral hemispheres. Here you got the lateral ventricle. Remember, ventricles are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Right here, we'd have the thalamus. Just inferior to that, we'd have the hypothalamus. Pituitary gland would be right there. Remember, the hypothalamus does control the pituitary gland. This would be the optic chiasm. That's where the tracks from the eyes, the optic nerve, they actually cross over. So some visual information that strikes my left eye will actually cross over and go to the right side of my occipital lobe. And on to the brainstem. So the midbrain is going to be in this area right here, midbrain. Also up here, you got the inferior and superior colliculi. I forgot to do up here. Here's the pineal gland, part of the epithalamus. The pons is going to be this bulging region right here. Here's going to be your pons. And then just inferior, or in this case, it's called caudal, to the pons, you'll have the medulla oblongata right here. Remember, here's your cerebellum, the little brain. This white matter inside the cerebellum, remember, that's called the arbor vitae, which means tree of life in, I believe, Latin. All right, so now we'll go on to the midbrain. All right, now the midbrain, located just inferior to the thalamus or the diencephalon, and just superior to the pons. So on this little thing, it'd be right here. There'd be your midbrain. Pons would be this bulging region, medulla down here. Here's your thalamus and hypothalamus right there. Once again, here's the choroid plexus. Remember, that's what creates and circulates cerebrospinal fluid through the ventricles of the brain. The ventricles are the spaces that contain cerebrospinal fluid. All right, so what does the midbrain do? Remember, reflexes for auditory stimuli. So that's the startle reflex. So if somebody comes behind you and goes, boo, you're going to jump. You won't even need to think about it. It's going to happen all by itself. That's the midbrain. Also, eye reflexes for scanning, for tracking visual objects, to focus on visual. I can focus on my finger, but then I can also focus on objects in the back of the room. So my eyes have to make adjustments in order to focus and to track different objects. So the auditory pathway, that's the inferior colliculi, and the superior colliculi is for the eye scanning reflexes. It also has motor tracts that convey impulses to the cerebrum, but most of the brainstem does that. So the first 2, these are the ones you're going to need to know. And you're not going to need to know superior and inferior colliculi. Just know reflexes for auditory, the startle reflex, and also eye scanning. Those are both functions of the midbrain. And now we have the pons, located just inferior to the midbrain and superior to the medulla, and also anterior to the cerebellum. You have the pons right here, this bulging region right here. That's your pons. Its major functions, it's got a respiratory reflex center for breathing, but what you're going to want to add to your notes, it's the depth of the inhalation. So I don't believe you're going to have to need to know these area, but you have the pneumotaxic area. So that's the area that when your lungs become filled with air, so you're breathing in totally full. When it's totally full, the pneumotaxic area is stimulated and it says stop the inhalation. The lungs are full. And then the opposite of that is the apneustic area, and that's when your lungs are totally you breathe out and it's totally empty of air. There's no more air in there. And that's what kind of signals to fill the lungs back up. Also remember it also controls different facial muscles through the facial nerve. So like smiling or frowning, chewing, salivating, all those originate in the pons, and also sensations in your face like touch or itch or temperature. Those neurons will all also go to the pons. So the depth of inhalation, facial expressions, salivating, chewing, and also you can feel facial sensations. So these are all functions of the pons. And the last part of the brain stem, the medulla oblongata, located just inferior to the pons, so it'll be down right in here. There's your medulla oblongata. Inferior to that, that is going to be the start of the spinal cord. All right, so what does it do? What are its functions? Now, I'd be careful with this one. Relays sensory info from the skin. True. Touch, vibration, pressure, and also proprioceptors. Remember, it tells me where my body is. Okay, my hand's right here. I got my eyes closed, but I know it's right there because I have proprioceptors. I can also, without looking, touch my nose, touch my mouth, touch my chin. I can do that stuff because I have proprioceptors. It allows my brain to know where my body is at in space, even if I'm not looking at it. But anyways, I would be careful with this one because if you just put this as a function on the test, that sounds a lot like thalamus to me. So I would focus more on these down here. Cardiovascular center. So it's the force and rate of the heartbeat. Basically, this is how you control your blood pressure and also blood vessel diameter. So the wider, that'll be lower blood pressure. If it constricts, that'll raise your blood pressure. The breathing center, the medullary rhythmicity center, and that's the rate of breathing. So remember, the pons was the depth of inhalation, like my lungs are full. That's the pons. The medullary rhythmicity center, it's the rhythm of breathing, the breathe in, breathe out. Increase breathing rate, decrease breathing rate. So that's the medulla oblongata, and also reflexes such as coughing. This is hiccups. I never call it a hiccough. Swallowing, vomiting, sneezing, yawning. And I'm going to go over the decussation of the pyramids here on the next slide. All right, so now the pyramids and the decussation of the pyramids. So up here you have the midbrain, the bulgy right here, that's the pons, and down here we got the medulla. So the pyramids are these bulges you can see right here and right here. These are the pyramids within the medulla. Decussation means to cross over. So you have motor tracks. So this would be coming from the right primary motor cortex coming down. Remember, the primary motor cortex is located on the precentral gyrus, just anterior or in front of the central sulcus. So these are coming from the right primary motor cortex, and when it reaches the medulla and the pyramids, they're going to decussate or cross over. So from the right side of the brain, it's going to go down to the left side of your body. So that's what causes the right side of your brain to control the left side of your body. And it's opposite on this side. So this is going to be the left cerebral hemisphere, the left primary motor cortex. The track's coming down, and when it reaches the medulla and the pyramids, they're going to decussate or cross over, causing the left cerebral hemisphere to control the right side of your body. Now, sensory fibers, sensory tracts also cross over. They cross over not at the pyramids. It's called the decussation of the lemniscus. It's not on here, so I do not think you need to know it, but you should know that sensory fibers, they also cross over. So things that I feel on the right side of my body, that information is going to go to the left side of my primary somatosensory cortex. Now, in my class yesterday, somebody asked me a really, really good question, and I do not know the answer. So any of my students, if you can research this and find out, he asked, what's the significance of this? Now, obviously, the left side of your brain is going to control the right side of your body, but what is the advantage? Why in evolution did this occur? Why is this better? Why is it better for the right side of my brain to control the left side of my body and the left side of my brain to control the right side of my body? Why isn't it just the right controls the right? It seems like it'd be simpler. There is a reason. I've been Googling it. I haven't found it. So if anybody in my class researches this and gives me the answer and shows me where they found it, I'll give you extra credit. And now we got the reticular formations. These are nuclei that go throughout the brainstem, so throughout the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain. And basically, so you're going to need to know. So it goes throughout the entire brainstem. You're going to need to know what it does. So it's called the reticular activating system. So it helps maintain alertness. Let's see, what do I want to do? Oh, right here. This is mainly what it is. It alerts the cortex to sensory signals to awaken from sleep. I didn't know this. I guess not smell, so it's not stimulated by the sense of smell, but like alarm clock, flashing lights, etc. Those are all going to cause your reticular formations to cause you to wake up. So, like right here, a coma is lack of the ability to regain consciousness because your reticular activating system is not working. It's inactive due to some sort of trauma, and that's why you're unable to wake up from sleep. So just know that the reticular formation, the reticular activating system, that's what arouses you from sleep. And the last part of the brain I'm going to go over today is the cerebellum. Cerebellum right here, just located posterior to the pons and posterior to the medulla and inferior to the occipital lobe of the cerebrum. All right, so there it is right there in green. So some features, it's called the vermis. It's right here, it's the central region of the cerebellum. Folia, you can barely see it, but there's these little folds in the cerebellum, kind of like the gyrus, the gyri, and the sulci of the cerebrum. So those little folds, those are the folia. Don't know if you'll need to know it. And don't forget the arbor vitae. So in our dissection, we did a mid-sagittal, we cut it open, and we saw the white matter. Remember, these are myelinated axons. These are tracks, and it kind of looks like a tree, a white tree deep inside the cerebellum. All right, but what you're really going to need to know, where is it located? What does it look like? And what does it do? It processes information from the primary motor cortex and the visual equilibrium pathways to assist in coordination, balance, posture, and definitely skilled motor activities. So any type of motor movement that requires a coordination and very skilled motor activities. Cheerleaders doing their cheers, a karate fighter, dancers, all these complicated motor movements. It's the primary motor cortex working along with the cerebellum in order to make those complex movements occur. And also don't forget about proprioception. So that's where you know where your body is at in space, even without looking at it. Once again, my right hand is right there because I have proprioceptors in my limbs and also in my brain. All right, so that is the cerebellum. All right, so that's it for today's lecture. In the next one, in lecture number 5, we're going to go over different things that protect the central nervous system. So, common thing would be the skull. It protects the brain. We're also going to learn the three layers of the meninges. That's tissue that helps to protect the brain and spinal cord. If you remember in the sheep dissection, we cut it off. So that at first the brain looked really cloudy. It looked kind of white. Well, when you cut away the dura mater and the arachnoid matter, and then it looked kind of shiny. All right, so that'll be next lecture. Different structures that help protect the brain and spinal cord. All right, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.